Welcome to Just an Average Citizen, the podcast that helps to inform, educate, and empower you to make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. This is Tammy Fogel, and I'm so glad you're willing to join me for another episode on learning what it takes to be more engaged and involved as a citizen here in the Big Country. Now, if you're not local to the Big Country, don't worry. You can still take some of the things we're talking about and apply it to your own area, because these are things that these are basic duties of citizens, and we've really reduced that to being what we've made it about what politicians do, but we don't realize that that's actually what basic citizen responsibilities are. And so I'm hoping to help educate you so that you can know how to make an impact in the area we live. Because if we're not engaged and involved, then we're not making an impact. If we're sitting off doing our own lives without really understanding what our local government is doing, then we are failing to participate as we were created to do. This is the government that works when we work as people participating, because it's the government for the people, by the people, because we are the people. And the government is our servant, not our master. And so it's so important that you subscribe and share this podcast with your family and friends so that you can understand what's going on and help them have access to this information, because this is not stuff that people are telling you when you show up at city council. This is not stuff that people are telling you when you show up to vote. You can't wait until election day to hope that you're going to make an impact, because if you're not involved and engaged earlier than that, then you're going to be missing out. Like, for example, we talk about budgets in July for the city, and then we make it, they choose how to, what tax rate to create. And for the longest time, I thought it was good to pay attention and work on things in July. But actually, we need to be telling our elected officials what we want and how we want our money to be spent, our tax revenues to be spent, like starting in January. Like, we need to be having this conversation. So when they have their budget retreat, then they're able to say, oh, these are some priorities of our citizens, not waiting until July when they've already pretty much have the budget figured out and they're going to vote on it and approve it for the most part. And so, I really helped you. My goal is to help you understand the tools that government gives us to be able to be involved and engaged. And one of those tools I talked a lot about in, I believe, July and August was the no new revenue tax rate. And that allows us to compare this year's tax rate to last year's tax rate, so you can have an apple comparison. So you're not comparing, because property taxes change. And so that changes exactly what revenue is being brought in. So that affects what is happening with the tax rate. And so it's important that we understand that we have a tool that the government has helped to require local municipalities and school boards and counties, commissioners to explain it to us so we understand. And when I asked people in charge of financing finances or tax rates, why they don't use the no new revenue rate, it's concerning when they say, well, it's confusing. Actually, it's not. We're supposed to understand this. And if they're not being able to communicate that, then they need to do a better job of communicating. So I really don't normally talk about this, but I think it's important for us to understand tax rate. It affects us. And there's especially if you live in the Abilene Independent School District, it's an important thing to understand, because what they're having is called a voter-approved tax rate election in November. And I'm not going to get into the nuances as whether or not you should do it. That's not really, to me, the end goal. Is, do you understand what you're doing? So first of all, I went to a meeting to understand what was going on, and it was mentioned that it's a semantics issue, whether you're doing a tax increase or a tax decrease or what's going on. It just depends on how you look at it. And that's the confusing language that we need to make sure we understand, so that we don't get snookered into things we don't really want to do and don't understand. And sometimes that's the goal. I'm not going to impugn motives on people, but I'm afraid that sometimes the confusion benefits people who want us to say yes to their plans and processes. First of all, the reason why you have to go to an election to vote on a tax rate is because you have to agree to increase your taxes. You don't have to go, I'm going to vote to decrease my taxes. That's never my tax rate. That's never, or decrease how much you're taking from me. That's never the issue. It's always because you're agreeing to increase your tax rate. And why that's important is because on the ballot, when you go to look at this for Proposition A, which is going to be at the bottom of a lot of other things, especially only if you're in Abilene Independent School Districts, it's going to say, this is a tax increase. Your taxes are going up. Are you okay with that? Do you understand what that means? Do you know why that's a good thing? Or do you know why that's a bad thing? The big deal is this is a unique tax increase because what it's doing is permanently increasing the maintenance and operation. Are you okay with a permanent tax increase that is not going to be adjusted next year when the tax rate is decided, or in 10 years? This is going to be a new permanent tax rate increase on the M&O, which is maintenance and operation. And again, if you don't understand, leave a comment, let me know, and I'll explain it better, because I'm not trying to tell you how to vote or what to vote for. I'm just saying, if they tell us it's a semantic issue, that's not really true. And it kind of makes it feel like you're being sold a bill of goods. So we hope that people would start communicating better and saying, yeah, this is a tax increase, but look, here's the benefits and here's why it's good for you, rather than just saying, it's not that big of a deal. It's a permanent tax increase or tax rate increase on the maintenance and operation. So that's not going to be adjusted depending on how the budget's doing. They're going to always be able to collect that money, which again, I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying, do you understand that? Okay. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I probably addressed a little bit more than I should. I wanted to come in here and tell you a little bit about another tool that I think is really important for citizens to understand, that, sometimes I go to meetings and they do not hand out packets, or they do not hand out minutes, or they do not hand out whatever they don't hand out. It is my right, and I'm in a public setting, to have access to information that's being presented. And so there's a lot of great process. Well, I don't say a lot of great process. One of the things a lot of people don't understand is if you come into government, there's agenda and minutes, and you can actually see all of the upcoming events. So like, for example, last week we had a city council meeting. And so you click on there and you can see the agenda and the minutes, or the agenda and the agenda packet, which is huge. That's the 500-page typically packet that tells you all the information that they're required by law to share. Remember, these are not things they're doing as good gestures. They're doing it because it's required by law. And that's the funny part is, it'd be great if some people would actually do the right thing, even though they're not required by law, because it allows for transparency and allows for citizens to understand what's going on. But this is where that all is. And so if, for example, I went, I can show you this here right now. Let me push. For example, I went to a meeting and they had a presentation, but they did not put it in the agenda packet. And so I just went, let me show you where I'm going to go. I just filed a public information request, partially because the file was too big and they had to give it to me that way. So I'm going to come to communications in here. Actually, I'm so sorry. So to file a public information request, which we talked about that last time, it is the right of the citizens to decide what information they want to know. It is not the right of the elected officials who represent us to tell us what we should and shouldn't know. So you come into departments. It's the easiest way I find. The city secretary is in charge, or that's where it falls under. And so you come in here and find public information request. Some people call them open record requests. Some people call them FOIAs, Freedom of Information Act. And so what you do right here is you click on the open information request, and you can use the next request system. It's so easy. You make a request, you fill out what request you need, and you want to be very specific. So like for me, I said, at the presentation for the January 31st, 2025 meeting about the budget retreat, can I have the presentation? What was the presentation slides, or just the presentation? And then basically, within 10 business days, which I've calculated is about 2 weeks, you should be able to get a response from them. Sometimes it's faster, but most of the time they take the full 10 business days. And so that's how you do it. And like we talked about last time, it's your right to ask this information. It's not a bad thing. And so in fact, one of the things I asked for was how of a contract specifically for something that happened at the convention center. And guess what? I found out public-private partnerships sometimes bite citizens back in the rear because we don't have access to the information. When our government gives it away to a private entity to maintain and manage, we don't have access to that information anymore because the private entities are not required by law to share that with the public. So I asked the City of Abilene for some contract information they had with the convention center, and because ASM Global is now the managing entity, the City of Abilene has no information in response. So I have to contact ASM Global for this information. And what's interesting is ASM Global has no obligation to tell me anything about the contract they signed. And that's the problem with public-private partnerships. And I'll go into that more in days to come, because you're like, what in the heck is a public-private partnership? Well, when you can lease land in Abilene, Texas, downtown to a profitable company for $1 a year for like 40 years, you lease it to them. That seems like it's messing with the citizens and benefiting the private entity. So we've got to do a better job of understanding these agreements. So when they come up, we can say, yeah, that's not a good deal for the citizens of Abilene or the city of Abilene. It is something that benefits the private entity and maybe some people connected to those who wanting to push this, but it's not good for us. So public-private partnerships stem from a stakeholder economy, which I want to tell you these terms now so that when we talk about it a little bit more, you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember Tammy talking about this. We understand that we are a free market economy, not a stakeholder economy. So it's important that we start requiring our elected officials to promote more free market economy options rather than stakeholder economy options. And there's a difference, and there's a reason why we are a free market economy. Okay, so now I'm going to move to the thing that I think is most important for everyone. I'm going to mute this, and I'm just going to push play. And you can see, hey, look, there I am sitting in the back and smiling because it's so much fun. Just kidding. This is a really long meeting. It was 5 hours long. There was a little break for lunch, I believe. I honestly can't remember. It was back in January. So I told you there is a process to how they come up with the budget. And so this was at the budget meeting, a budget retreat, which typically happens at the end of January, February, or it could be in March, depending on how things go. I'm not really sure what determines that, but you got to pay attention to it. And it happens on a day separate from the city council. And the problem was at this meeting, they didn't give us any presentation slides to look over before we got there. So I was furiously taking notes. And so because I know about the public information request, I asked for some notes. And we're going to talk about those notes. And I'm going to show you what those notes mean, because I think as a citizen, you should be concerned what's going on and you need to ask questions. And we should be having more information given to us along the way so that we can know that this process is actually being handled appropriately. And that's one of the things that I knew when we were trying to decide if we wanted to improve the airport and spend $20 million on a bond, which turns into basically like $30 million. Was that the best decision? Because I knew this was coming, but because there was a timeline in place, I didn't feel like it was appropriate to talk about until they showed what they were doing. And unfortunately, they've chosen, to my knowledge, to not address anything publicly in a way that we can understand. So what happens is, I'm going to come here and show you this. Oops, just kidding. All right, so this is actually from my public information request. This is the presentation slides that you just saw happening. Sorry. So if you were to go here and see a little bit more information, the problem is I can't really scoot for it. I could do this. Let's see here. I'll speed it up, and then you'll see that there's some slides coming up. This is Robert Hanna. This was in January. He, of course, retired in March. And because of this meeting, I was so interested and intrigued in what was going on, I decided it was time for me to go to the Fireman's Retirement and Relief Board meeting, I think is what it's called. And so it's not going to show, of course. So I'm just going to come here and show you. Let me come here real quick and show you. So this is the first slide, the Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund. There we go. I got it right. And so they have a board meeting at the end, the last Tuesday of the month. And I will say they're such delightful men. I'm enjoyed getting to know some of the firemen on this board, not even because we've had conversations, but just because it's really neat to be a fly on the wall in these meetings and get to participate in this process and understand what's going on. But I was shocked. What I found out was that the Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund is in dire straits right now. It's actually a fund that the city gives money to help with retirement, to give retirement to the Abilene firefighters. And the plan is only city-funded retirement plan. The plan is the only city-funded retirement plan for the city firefighters, and the pension benefits accrued by our firefighters are statutorily guaranteed by the city of Abilene. So regardless of what happened is we're responsible as a city to pay for it. So we have got to make some really hard decisions here because this has been neglected for a long time. And at this meeting, I learned that Councilman Brian Yates is the representative for the city council on this board. But what happened, what was interesting to me was now he will be up for re-election in the spring. So in the spring, in May, it'll be 3 years since he's been a councilman. Before he was on the board as a representative for the city, it was actually Mayor Weldon Hurt, and he was on the board, to my knowledge, for about 7 years. So Mayor Hurt's known about this problem. It's been something that they've probably talked about throughout the years. And what I wanted to do is go to the board meeting so that I could see what was the actual reason for why we've taken so long to resolve this issue. So if the retirement fund cannot fund benefits, the city of Abilene must fund the gap. Okay. The Abilene Fireman's Relief Retirement Fund is governed by a board of directors. So they have several different people on there. And they worked cooperatively to address underfunded liability over the last few years. It culminated in requests for a peer review process by the Pension Review Board, the PRB, of the state of Texas. So the concern was brought up, to my understanding, because there was possibly some legislation that was going to pass that would require cities, municipalities to have their pension fund at least at the 50% level. And anyone under the 50%, anyone underfunded below the 50% level would have to be taken or given direction by the state. And the state would tell them how to direct the funds. And the city council, those in discussion, were concerned that that would happen, and they did not want to be controlled by the state. So they're trying to figure out how they could make this work. Okay. The board is interested in addressing the liability, and the city management is also interested in addressing the liability. Okay. So here's the thing. What I've learned is that cities you're not required to look at the overall cost. So when you're talking about debt, you only talk about the debt payment. Okay. So, which is ludicrous to me, because when do you ever look at your credit card statement and go, oh, look, all I have to worry about is the minimum payment. You know, the minimum payment is $500. I owe $100,000, but I'm only going to worry about the minimum payment of $500. That never goes well. And there are times where they refinance it, so to speak, in city terms and save us a little bit of money. But most of the time, all debt is looked at in 40-year anywhere from 20 to 40-year terms. So as of October 1st, 2023, the actuarial report reported a fund ratio of 45%. Historically, anything public pension funded less than 80% is considered underfunded. So our underfunded liability totals are almost $72 million. So 45% is, 50% or 80% is considered underfunded, and we're actually at 45%. And so we owe $72 million. So granted, we don't have to get all of that paid off or all that taken care of right away, but it is troubling because that's not going to come out of the Minor Improvement Project Fund. There's no funding that's going to be able to cover this, and most likely it will require the city to come into debt. So let me see if I can get to the right part. Okay, so they're talking about the different payments. If we chose to take out debt, which would be, I guess, a certificate of obligation of $50 million, we would cost us $4 million, $4.2 million. And saving, the difference is $2.4 million. This is where I don't like how they do this, because the annual contribution is $6.6 million. And so they're saying, if we just go ahead and get debt, then we're going to save $2 million. But we're not really saving it, because if we take out $50 million, that's going to be like $75 million, right? If we take out 70, that's going to be like a lot more. And I'm not going to do the math on that right now off the cuff. So they're only looking at what are we going to cost? What's the minimum payment? And for whatever reason, that's how they're allowed to think of those things. I'm always thinking of, well, why are we paying so much in interest when we should have been taking care of this a long time ago? And I don't understand why it's not been taken care of. So they're going to have to explore some options. So what I wanted to say, they were concerned about the legislature bringing up, let me come back to this page in case. There we go. They were worried about what happens if the legislature passes a bill or legislation where we will then be responsible for following their guidelines if we're under 50%. So what happened was then after that discussion, it was a really good discussion, and I'm so thankful for Councilman Yates' attempt to explain that, a very complicated thing. Robert had a good discussion. There was lots of good dialogue that happened, and I would encourage you to watch it. If you go into the watch a meeting and go to the January 31st budget retreat and start about 57 minutes in, you should be able to listen to the conversation, and I would highly encourage you to do that. And listen for yourself so you can start understanding. You're going to be feeling like you're drinking out of a fire hydrant. It's totally normal. So then the meeting just so happened to be the next, maybe that week or the week after I went to the next meeting. Maybe I guess it was in February I went. And so I got to hear a great discussion on what was going on. what the plan was, what they were talking about. They had some reports that came in, and it was a very insightful and very informative thing. Sadly, they don't record these meetings, and I don't understand why they don't record these meetings, because it actually would help, I think, the firemen out, because there's some things that are private, and I understand that, but for the most part, it should be recorded so you could watch and listen and hear what's going on. And there's several meetings that are not recorded that way, and it's really frustrating as a citizen because I can't go to every meeting, but I can watch them. I can find time to watch them, and that's important. Anyway, so there was discussion about how to solve this, and most of it was to take on debt. There's a lot of complicated things I'm not going to get in about how much the city pays, how much the firemen pay, where you have to be to make sure you're at the right numbers. And so it seemed like there was a plan forward. And so then the March meeting, Robert Hanna, his last month, he was like, okay, let's come up with a plan. And he was like, I thought they came up with a plan in February. He came back to the March meeting and said, unfortunately, the mayor doesn't want to deal. Well, he didn't say he didn't want to deal with it. He's not. He wants us to wait until August to resolve this issue. And I share that with you because I was there and I heard it. And I thought, well, why aren't we just doing it now? And I was like, oh, well, maybe because he wants to resolve it after the budget's established. And maybe nobody's be paying attention in August. It's kind of like dropping a news story on Friday night. No one's listening. No one's paying attention, but it kind of goes under the radar. Maybe that's what was happening in August. I honestly don't know, because there was no public discussion from the mayor or any information like that. And so that leads us to, I waited until August to see what happened. Nothing happened. I continued to go to the meetings. I missed a couple of the Fireman Relief and Retirement Fund meetings because, life happens. And then I realized I probably should address it at the city council. And so I addressed it on Thursday at the city council, and it's already, a lot of you have seen it. It's public. I guess I could post it here on Just an Average Citizen as well. I posted on my private page or my personal page, just because sometimes you don't necessarily want to hear what I have to say about my opinions on things. But, when it comes to city stuff, I'm trying to give you a more balanced, and less opinionated, but I guess I'm always in giving you my opinion. So maybe I'll share that here on Just an Average Citizen page as well. But many people watched it, had a couple of comments. And in fact, it was mentioned by a police officer that theirs is underfunded as well, which I don't know how to find that out. That's something else now to look into. I feel like I birthed another child and get to take care of it and figure out how to navigate it and help you understand it so that we can all make our community better. Because one of the main jobs of our city is to have create public safety. And we do that by paying our civil servants well and making sure they're taken care of for. And there's been a lot of watering down of some things going on that we need to really redeem and restore over the last 5 years. And I'm hoping we can get that fixed so that our policemen and our firemen can actually do their job and not have to worry about all the emotional and all the other stuff that really is not their purview. And so that's a conversation for another day. But I just wanted you to hear so that by the end of September, I felt like it would be a decent thing to say. And I try to reach out and let people know the council know what I'm wanting to address beforehand, just to give them heads up. But I really don't know. I didn't have the time, and I don't really know what they're going to say that's going to make me feel satisfied, because one of the things I've always been pushing is transparency. Be transparent. Let us know what is going on so you can build our trust. And so it was communicated to me after the meeting that there was a process happening, and they weren't ready to disclose it to the public. And I'm like, hey, just say that then. And that way we know you're still keeping it in the front of the forefront and making sure we're taking care of what we need to take care of. But this is just a learning experience so that you can understand that sometimes we don't necessarily say things or ask for things because we expect them to have an answer and they can do it, but they can communicate to us what their plan is in a way that they have failed to do at this point. And that's kind of what I've been asking about the street maintenance fee, the street maintenance projects, the budget. There's so many different things. Why are we paying for $1 million dog park that we didn't have to relocate, but we wanted to because we wanted it in a better location because it was kind of awkward and messed up our plan for the Flatfields area. We didn't have to relocate that dog park. And it seems like when we're underfunding our retirement for our firemen, maybe $1 million dog park is an extravagance that we shouldn't focus on right now. Or maybe the bathrooms and maybe the boat ramp improvement project. While it's great there's a grant available, we probably should take care of our public safety before we worry about a boat ramp and bathrooms, new public bathrooms. I mean, another $700,000 in public bathrooms we just approved in this last year's budget. So what are we doing and how are we going to resolve this? Because at the end of the day, we only have so much funding, so much revenue in our city, and we've got to prioritize and make sure we're spending it where it needs to be spent. And the way right now the city budget is, the way I'm afraid all municipal budgets are, is that we don't really get to see what's being done. And that's where it falls on us to make sure we're electing people who want transparency, who want to communicate what's going on so that we as citizens can be informed and know that when we see that dog park, every time we drive by it, we're like, oh my gosh, there's that $1 million dog. See that house? That house costs almost $500,000. Why are we paying for a $500,000 restroom for people who go to the dog park? If you come to if there's ways to resolve issues at the dog park that didn't require a $500,000 bathroom, but that's a priority for the city. And so that's a priority for those who approved it on the council. And so do you like those priorities? If you're good with that, then you got your people in office. If you're wanting other things to be prioritized, then you've got to start paying attention. Get to know some of them. Pick one council member, take them to coffee and just say, hey, thank you for your service. And let me know what can I do as a citizen, and have these conversations, because that's what we do as citizens. That's what we do to engage with our elected officials, because they serve us. And how can they serve us if they don't know us? So I hope that helps you give a little direction on some things you can do. We have an election coming up here in November, some constitutional amendments, and it's important. I'll be discussing those in the days ahead. But what I have been told is constitutional amendments typically are ways that our legislators can fund pet projects that they can't get approved through the budget. So it should make us a little weary to approve those amendments. Not all of them are bad, but I think the majority of them are just raising more revenue for them to spend money when, what was it? I heard that next legislative session in 2 years, they're expecting to have a $20 billion surplus in Texas. How does that even happen unless you're taking in too much money? And we need as citizens to be involved and engaged in what's going on. So thank you for sticking with me to hear the end of this. It's a lot, but I think it's important for us to start understanding these moving parts that should impact what is going on and how things are being communicated. And it all started because I was willing to step in and start going to meetings and paying attention to what's going on. And it didn't happen overnight, but I'm really starting to feel like I'm getting some information that helps me understand where we need to start having these hard conversations to get our city in a better place so that we actually reflect the community that we truly are. And so I hope you feel a little more informed, a little more educated, and a little more empowered to make an impact in Abilene in the big country. Until next time.